Talk, 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 talk. Art of the Zodiac presents Talk, Talk, Talk.
Certainly is a big part of it all. Frustration is something I was sharing with my patrons, just like if you're feeling frustration, that is a key word for Mars, stationing, slowing, and stopping. Can't get action is frustrated, frustrated is a verb, that kind of thing. But anyhow.
You nailed it. What is your thoughts on so we have just the general Mars story, as you said, or in it, but specifically, what piece do you think we got from the Mars trine Neptune?
To be honest on that, I am with Neptune and Pluto and Uranus. I'm just going to give you my straight answer, and then I'll come back and do some delineation. But I don't really look at them very much unless they're like closely conjunct, maybe a square. I treat them as more like fixed stars. And so I find, and the reason why I do that is that every planet you add in and you give full status, it just complicates the ability to kind of see the core energy, in my opinion. And I think about the seven, and this is a whole topic we can come back to.
I love it.
Yeah, I'll come back and delineate in a little bit. But it's like the Knights of the Round Table. It's 7 knights, 12 kingdoms, and anything else is a part of our sky and map and part of our observed reality. But I don't. For me, I don't add it into the symbolic category as that core system. The system was developed without any other planets for 2,000 years or more, and I just feel like you basically get into some real complications around how you then have an elegant symbolic model. And I'm for making new models, don't get me wrong, but I just don't know if we want to use half of this one and then try to make something else that, to me, it's a little bit clunky. So for me, I'm less interested in the Neptune energies as a part of the trine to Mars. And I guess I would bring Neptune in more with Saturn. I think that becomes a more interesting conversation. And then yes, you have the Saturn Mars trine, which has been operative this whole time, and I would kind of want to start there and then maybe layering in some Neptune. But anyhow, that's just my response. If I had to delineate it, we're in a dream world right now, totally dreamlike, totally unreality at any number of levels. And you might assign some of that to Neptune's move through Pisces since about 2012 and all the social media, this simulation of reality that we get in our digital worlds. And so that's just a part of it all. If you're having the frustration, maybe people might want to check in around, how are your digital non-realities serving you, is just what I would say. Maybe there are some online communities or ways to escape, quote unquote, a Neptune keyword that can assuage you a little bit here. I mean, I don't think escape is always a bad thing. So that's kind of what I would say, get on Netflix or something if you're feeling frustrated.
Okay, that's a great delineation. Get on Netflix if you're feeling frustrated.
Yes.
That's the horoscope. Just for the record, you're absolutely preaching to the choir, because at least in natal readings, I don't really look at the outer planets. And it's funny how often I'm getting snapped at by people but you didn't notice Pluto or Chiron. And I'm like, okay, I don't ignore them when they're very obvious, but for the most, it's an added layer. I had someone the other day, we were talking, I was, I don't know if it was circumambulations or was just talking something about Time Lord systems and talking about larger chunks of time. And the person I was talking to was a very intelligent person, a dear friend of mine. She looked at me and she goes, but I thought the outer planets are how we understand larger periods of time. And I'm like, okay, but how did people understand larger periods of time for thousands of years before those? Anyway, I stated my answer, obviously, but I would be curious to know how you respond to that.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, I just would challenge the claim that larger term cycles can only be accessed through outer planets, because it's just, I think it's factually inaccurate. We've got Saturn Neptune conjunctions and elements. Those take 200 years to work through an element. You've got a Mars retrograde cycle, just to come back to that. Last time Mars was retrograde in Cancer and then back into Leo, then back into Cancer with 77 and 78. That's a long time. I wasn't alive back then. So we're dealing with a cycle even now that is long enough to do even like longer term cycle work, like collective mundane work around the length of that cycle. And I would even posit this, a new moon every 18.6 years in the same degree, so that's an 18-year cycle, and that would be the nodal cycle. That's a long cycle. So you start layering in like Saturn and the lunar nodes, you're going to be talking about hundreds of years. You layer in Saturn, Jupiter, and the lunar nodes, you're talking about large swaths of time to have a repeated cycle. So that's just what I would say back to that person. Like, it's factually inaccurate. And I would encourage an exploration of some of these larger cycles that emerge with traditional planets.
I think some of it is a bit romance, right? Like if you think about it, to take the time to think about these cycles, it's quite like, what should I say, like mundane, right? That we could it's a very simple in this way math, and we can go back, we could look at these dates and they string eloquently together, and like what they bring is just really incredible. But there's something about like the big sound bite of, but this hasn't happened in, Pluto is moving into Aquarius and our whole world's going to be aliens falling from the sky. I think it's just like there's a romance to that maybe we don't get with the simpler, more accurate, arguably, astrology.
Yeah, and it's newer. I mean, I think that you look to some of the history, and I wanted to ask you about this. I don't know if I'll just mention it here. We can come back to it if you want, but like, you're in LA. I saw you were going to be at the Manly P. Hall Center, Philosophic Research Society. You do a lot of work with that society, it appears, but you have these theosophical emergences. The 20th century, as mass media comes online, includes a lot of fresh and new ideas being shared around these planets that were newly discovered, and it is exciting. And I don't want to be dismissive of it that much. I mean, I will discuss it, particularly like a sign change I think is important. I don't know about how much it is for natal astrology, but certainly for collective triggering of the collective unfoldment, these outer planets do appear to be quite interesting. I would just say part of my critique of it as well is that, well, let's talk about Ceres, let's talk about Haumea, let's talk about Makemake, let's talk about a lot of these other planets that are online too. And that's when I do readings, I put all of the ones available in my software on. I want to, if we're going to go there, let's go there, and let's start layering in a lot of the different planets. And then we can see what that does is it allows us to weight them properly. Because it's easy just to say, well, we'll just have Pluto, Uranus, and Neptune, and then we're going to stop there. And then now we're going to treat them as if they were function in the same way as Saturn and Jupiter. But when you say, well, what about those 5 others? Now you have to reconsider that choice. And I don't see a reason to exclude them at all. And so what was I going to just, those are some thoughts there. I forgot the exact quite the exact question, but it's just, I like them for cycle work. For natal astrology, you can remove them. I do that a lot in readings. I'll just take them off. As soon as I know that person isn't someone who's like, I want to talk about my Neptune or Chiron, I'll sometimes remove them. And I like to read that way. Yeah. I prefer to read that way. I think it's a better reading. So.
It's interesting because one of the things, actually, I love that we just sort of jumped in with this conversation, and I'm actually going to take it back and start from the proper place.
Okay.
Well, I don't know. That was a great place to start, but maybe not the proper place, but the like early place. We talked a little bit about this before, but about how you found astrology. But I'm curious to know what you did before you were an astrologer. And then there's a second part to that question. The moment when you decided that this is something I really want to devote my life to.
Yeah, interesting. That's a great question. I mean, so my living and my work before I became an astrologer, I was just a functionary in, the system. I worked for a business owner, and I did research and paperwork and just kind of an administrative functionary in an operation. He did various things like real estate and had a lot of different businesses, but I was kind of a personal assistant, and, and my skills were well utilized. I was writing a lot and researching a lot. So there was that part of my life. But then, I was a tarot student and a serious tarot practitioner for about 5 years before I became an astrologer. And that greatly influenced I don't know, I think it set me up to be more open to more of the contemporary schools like evolutionary astrology, and their powers, because they have great powers and they have a great, they are a great addition in terms of how they engage with like meanings of planets and how they talk about prediction, and it's very symbolic and it's very malleable, and there's no restricted delineation. Often it's kind of feeling into a symbol, or kind of, and it's also more intuitive, and I feel like it allows for other non-astrological methods of knowing, like meditation or other intuitive practices. And so tarot is like that. I mean, you read tarot cards and it's not going to say, next year in 6 months, this will happen. That's not what it is. Instead, you have 3 cards, they're pictures, and there's correspondences to those cards, but you're having to bring more of an open-minded, explorative approach. Like, what is this trying to say? Let me kind of hear a few options. Let's guess, what could this be? Oh, this kind of feels right. So it's, that's part of what, at least divinatory, from that lens, I brought into my astrological practice. And why? So that's the first question. The second, when did I know I wanted to devote my life to astrology? I think it was, looking back, I mean, I didn't really have that conversation with myself, like, this is my life's purpose. I think until probably, I don't know, once I started getting confirmation that this is what I was, I think it was more of an admission, like, this is what I've become at this point. I mean, this is my livelihood. This is how I communicate with the most people in the world around this practice, and it's my livelihood. And then it's just an admission. Okay, now this is supporting me, and I'm in a way, I'm contributing to it. And so there was an acknowledgement of that symbiosis, and I still think about that today. That's why I like to center astrology in general, because it does feel like it's a wellspring of power or something like this. And as practitioners, we have to tend to that to keep it alive in a way. And so it was keeping me alive. And so, I kind of was like, all right, I'm going to try to, and I was doing this already too, because I was publishing a lot on social media and deeply thinking about astrology with almost all of my free time. And then and then I just sort of realized, wow, this is really, I'm tending to it. It's tending to me. And then I just kind of, like, at this point, I don't even know what else I would do. I mean, I don't even really have an ambition to do anything else. I mean, I have some other things I'm into, but I can't see myself ever not being in the astrology scene and thinking about the astrology and engaging with it. Part of it is just so powerful. I mean, even today, readings this week, I'm just like shocked. Like, I can't believe that happened in this person's life. And that was the transit, and that's how it materialized. And I'm like, wow, I just feel grateful to be able to see that, help them see it, talk to them about it, and all of that. So I hope, but just to put it, it was, a few years back, a couple of years in as a serious student. Once you become a professional, then you're either alive as a professional or not. And it's not like a threat to anybody out there or something, but it's just normal. You start something new and it's either going to stick or not. And so for me, it kind of stuck quite fast. And then that's what I was. And, anyhow, that's a little bit of a long answer there, but that's what I would say on those.
Yeah, no, that's the perfect answer. I'm always curious, and this is a question I ask everyone or every astrologer I know, but like, how do you explain astrology to other people? I mean, this is something I struggle with daily because I interact with a lot of people who aren't astrologers, and I want to give them an answer that makes me in astrology not sound like a crazy person.
Mm-hmm. I love that question. And yeah, I mean, what I've settled on recently, like last few years, I just think this is the easiest answer. And it's true. It's very true. I just say, I counsel people about their lives. They come to me to talk about their lives, and I help them work through some of the problems they have. But I use the astrological symbol set as part of that. I mean, I sometimes I won't even say the astrological symbol set as yet. My job is to help people, and they come to me to talk about their problems and their lives, and I'm there to listen and try to assist as best I can. And when I say that, usually people, they get it. That snaps into actually what's happening, because that is what's happening in the reading. The astrology is there. It's the central modality or method, but if you can describe what's happening without even mentioning astrology, and then people realize it's valuable, because then they're like, wow, okay, you're providing a role as like an aide or an assistant or as a confidant or whatever other word we would use.
I love that. And also, do you get people, I'm sure you do, who tell you they're afraid of astrology? They've had a bad reading where someone told, like everyone's had that person, I'm assuming, where I've had a really terrible reading. The person told me a lot of things I didn't want to hear, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just really afraid. How do you respond to those people?
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Yeah, it's funny. It's funny how life works that way. I was just with someone earlier, and it wasn't quite like that, but there was some of that expressed, and I was saying to them, you've come to the right reader, because I'm going to positive project and help you, co-create with these symbols in the most positive way as possible, to use the astrology to kind of as a positive, inspiring, tool here. And so that's kind of I would tell them that was, in that moment, it wasn't as heavy. So I was kind of a little bit jocular with them, but that's how I try to do it as a default. Let's assume this is how are we working with this to make your life better. So it's like you go in, that would be part of my more serious answer, is like, okay, we're here to try to make your life better. And we're here to try to use what these symbols are saying so that you can play the cards of your life in the best, most supportive way possible. And from that frame, then it's kind of hard to go wrong, because that's what we're setting out to accomplish. I will say that, yes, I mean, I've gotten that before too, where people have come back to me and they're like, listen, I got another reading, and I want you to just come back because you're basically going to do sugarcoating well. And I say that kind of a joke with you, because it's not like it's lying, but for example, Saturn, or even Mars, let's just stay on this Mars topic, because this is the transit we're all dealing with. It's like, yeah, it's frustrating. And if frustration emerges, we have a first layer culprit in the astrology. That said, I don't think it has to be frustrating for anyone. And I would be more interested in other delineations, maybe for someone like, what is what's being reconstituted? What's requiring tinkering to reconstruct, so that in February, and that's where I kind of bring people pretty quickly, it's like, look, February, March, and April, it's going to be awesome. You're going to have a whole new reconstructed forward movement of action in Cancer. So let's talk about that. Like, let's talk about what you're working towards, how you're going to embrace this to tinker and make it better, so that these frustrations won't repeat, and so, but yeah, and then the last thing I'll just say on this is, I do think we need to read the ethics rules. The ISAR ethics rules are awesome. They provide some guardrails for how we talk about astrology with people, and we need those guardrails, and we need to be, having regular self-reflection. We're not here to scare people. We don't know the future. I'm adamant about that now. I mean, I have no idea. And now here's what the symbols say. We can start narrativizing and maybe inspire you and kind of lock in with some grooves as it appears to be applicable. But, we've always got to leave room for the unknown. And those rules are great. They're like, we don't know the future. And some people like to bristle at that, other astrologers. I'm squarely in the camp of now the ISAR people and their ethics rules. But
I agree with you. I never understand it when people get really upset about when people get really upset to defend predictive astrology, because I think oftentimes predictive astrology works really great in hindsight. Like, oh, of course, it's fitting in perfectly. But like the truth is, I don't want to corner someone into my, vision of reality going forward. Yeah, because we just don't know. And then also the other part of it, sometimes I think in certain circles, and I think this is why I think your work is so refreshing, very intelligent astrologers, it quickly becomes like betting, right? Like we're like you just this desire to be right. And if you're obviously, using it to pick racehorses, I guess that's clever and no harm. But like when you sort of forget that you're taking this, that always drives me nuts.
Yeah. And to those people, I say, show me the accounting, show me the audited accounting, and I don't believe you. Like that's, I mean, and not that I don't think it can be interesting in terms of adding to like a betting system or something,
Yeah.
but that's a bold claim. And unless you've got the, proof, we have to be skeptical that they're saying, and I've done this now. This is highly relevant because of the election. Obviously, I'm going to release a video about just these topics we're talking about, because I don't think I've been expressing it like it's not the highest and best use of astrology to do the kind of A or B in the future. But it's the technique of the Aries ingress, and which planet is stronger, and party in power versus opposing party, who wins. I mean, I went back, and it's not always correct. I mean, there's some cases where it's like clearly like Saturn in Cancer, that's weak, and that party won, and the other was like an exalted sun or something. So it's, even the techniques don't work 100% of the time. And we have to admit that. I mean, if we're going to have any conversation about astrology and its value, we're going to have to admit that pretty quickly out of the gate. Like, this isn't a science in the sense that there's scientific tools. Science has developed things like telescopes, and we use those.
Yeah.
There is measurement systems, which I don't know if that's science strictly speaking, but it's like a scientific, maybe way to be in the world. We use those, but it's not like astrology is just, you're going to have a formula and then you're going to know what's going to happen tomorrow at all. And I want to say this because I want to defend the other side a little bit.
Yeah.
Like where I think it's useful. So because it begs the question, well, what are we even doing? And specifically on talking about the future, where it can be useful is, so let's come back to this Mars retrograde scenario. And let's say we have a Libra rising, or I'm not going to do Libra rising because I'm a Libra rising. I don't want to influence, but let's say we have a Capricorn rising.
Okay.
So you have Mars now in your seventh house, and just stop there. And we know it's going to Leo, their eighth house, whole sign, and then coming back to Cancer, their seventh house. But that alone, and so then you would say, okay, here are the dates of when all this is going to happen. So you can present someone a set of queries. Go think about this. Go ask yourself where you're at with these topics. Go see if contemplating these topics is useful for you right now, maybe matches some of the things that you're dealing with. And that task can be very fruitful, independent of what happens in the future. So, and often what you'll find with that is when you say, well, Mars entered Cancer on the 4th of September this year. Did something happen with your relationships? And, too often enough, it's like, yeah, wow, that's when, my partner got part-time hours at work. So something like that. Yeah. And now it's okay. And that started right on the ingress. So now we're like, okay, cool. So we have a match with that timing pretty quickly as the stories begin to emerge. Now you might be able to say, all right, well, thinking about how you and your partner work together well with the shared assets, what kind of budgeting or reviews around money and resource might you be able to do from now until next June when Mars enters Virgo? And you give them, and that's the questions I was referring to earlier. The symbols evoke topics and topics of exploration. And it doesn't matter what happens. Like, that can be useful to think about. That can help people to think about that. And then you're just using astrology to guide how you want to reflect on your life. And so that alone is extremely powerful. And one more thing on that, I would just say, so that's the Mars retrograde in someone's 8th and 7th. But then you might also tell them, listen, the symbols of Mars, it's moving direct, it's gaining speed in April and May. You might be in more of a solution-based model with your partner at this time if they're going to look for other work to supplement income. The symbols have a green light around those areas, maybe feeling better or more resolved. And I think that's safe. It's not like a prediction per se, but it, if you're articulating it, it's the symbol map that it would say that. It's true. That's true. That's a true statement. I mean, Mars moving faster, working through the degrees that had gone retrograde through, now getting into some new territory. I think that's how I like to talk about the future with people. As a short example there. And I think that can be highly useful. And whether we call that prediction or not, we don't even need to label it. We're addressing the future using astrology.
Yes, absolutely. I know. And it sounds similar to, you might look at a set of charts for the beginning of your personal year, right? Solar return, perfections, whatever. And, I know at least for me, that's always a good way to understand where the sort of rough spots are going to be in the year. And I don't look at my chart every day. I'd be curious to know your habit around that. But for me, the most like powerful personal use of astrology has been, I have an astrology mentor and I'm a therapist. I'm going on I've been having a bad week. My therapist is just holding space and it feels a little worthless, to be honest. I love my therapist. But it's with my astrologer where I can go, oh, we're in, like, I forget it. Like, oh, you remember that rough spot? You're like in it right now. And to me, that's like, oh, this is why I do this. So I can recognize I'm not going crazy. The world is not like this forever, but I'm here and there's going to be a way out.
Yeah, it's so powerful to speak to the moment we're in and what's happening in that moment. And this is why I say it's a processing tool is its great powers. That astrology as a co-pilot or a adjunct as we go through life, and we have astrology to help us process the events as they arise. It's very good at meeting the challenge of the present moment, astrology, and helping us untangle or ground or confirm or feel safer or more comfortable or something like this. Astrology is excellent at that. And yeah, I love that you're doing that. That's awesome. I would just to come back. I mean, I know what's going on in my chart. I know the transits that I'm interested in. I know where Saturn is. I know where Jupiter is. I know where the eclipses have been and where they'll be. I know where Mars is. I don't wake up thinking about my chart, but I mean, I am aware of the bigger themes, and I'm locked in. Just how could I not be? At some level, because I'm talking about it every day with people. So it's just there always. And so, something emerges and I'm like, okay, boom, now that's that Saturn just ingressed into Pisces for me. Now I start knowing what that's about. And it helps me just, again, process and narrativize and know if it starts matching the astrological symbolism, to maybe commit more to that or to stay with something. When it's clear my astrology is confirmed, that's maybe where life is calling me, something like this. But yeah, I mean, I guess I would say I'm aware. Maybe I should be a little bit more locked in on my own personal astrology. Maybe I will be at some point, but I guess let me say this. The way the planets move, I find to be quite comforting. Like, you have some faster moving ones.
Yeah.
You have some slow, medium terms. You have some slower moving ones. So I find it doesn't task me with as much to stay on top of where things are. Like, if you're just going to look at like Venus, for example, or Venus, the Sun, and Mercury as a pair, they travel together. So when you have the solar seasons, you're going to capture some of that Venus, Mercury, Sun through the houses in your chart. And I will do that. I will keep aware of that. But anyhow, I like to throw it out too and just live. That said, if I'm going to do anything big like travel or do some big decision, I will lock in way more granularly with my astrology.
I do love it I love when you forget about the astrology and it kind of hits you over the head, though, good or bad. You're like, oh, oops. Yes. Here we go. Thank you. How do you, and maybe you're above this, which I wouldn't doubt. And I don't mean that I'm being sincere. Like, we're not all highly neurotic like myself. How do you deal? Because when you first, for people who maybe are starting to study astrology, and maybe for the rest of your astrological career, you're going to have to deal with astro fear. Do you deal with that, and how do you deal with it?
Yeah, I would say I'm less into that. Simply
I'm not
because,
into it.
yeah, no, I
It's just a fear.
know. No, I know. I mean, I guess it's less, I would say my fears are less astro based, and they're more just like uh, other fears. Like, I mean, I'm aging. I'm not as young as I once was. And, I think about my health and trying to keep that as active as I can. But sometimes at night, I'm thinking about, if this is what mid 40s is like, shoot, what is it going to be like in mid 60s? What kind of like health stuff is going to, change what I once knew my body to be and my vitality, so there's those kind of more generalized stuff that I think I am more inclined to engage. No, I would just say with the astro stuff, yeah, I mean, there's certainly, I looked at some transits. So let me just walk you through. Like, if I have a Mars in the 12th, Saturn in the 12th, thankfully won't be there for a long time for me. But like anything in the 12th, just historically, I know is not as easy of a house for transits for me. So, there's always, I'm like, okay, what's this going to be? And then I try to replace it. So the skills I've learned to deal with other, let's say pathologies around mental health, really have helped me with astrology. And like this one I'm alluding to is like the replacement. I mean, I'm big into like self-talk. I've had to learn how do I talk to myself? It's really important. And if I find myself slipping on that, it's like a, Mayday. I've got to replace it immediately. I've got to get into some positive thinking. Prayer has been big for me. If we want to bring it back into spiritual life, what spiritual tools do I have, and do they work, and can I use them? And I find the ones that work outside of the astrological fear also work within the astrological fear. And, ultimately, I've been thinking about this a lot recently too. I mean, the idea that anyone's safe for anywhere else is just kind of a myth. I mean, I'm kind of afraid of flying. I just was in Vienna. I flew there, and I was like, am I really that safe if I stayed here? I mean, you could get hit by a car at any time. I mean, there's like the idea I'm controlling my life is kind of I question that, are we really in control? I mean, we're not even controlling the breathing. It's some magical thing, so I kind of go there, and I like to then rely on basically a bedrock of a spiritual frame of reality that, once you accept something like we're all going to die, we have no control at some level over our lives, is it worth trying to worry about whether a Mars transit is going to be productive in the 12th house? And that was like the last time. I mean, yeah, maybe a little challenging, but I'm learning how to like manage my life better when I have opportunities for growth, you might say. So that's that's a long-winded response of just saying, I think we have to have robust spiritual tools to help us with our fears as they arise, and things like meditation, exercise, whatever people use for that. I won't even try to restrict that. Whatever you would use to release fear. Let me just say one more thing, because I think that's response. I think that is my first layer of response. But if you're talking about within the world of astrology, what would you do different in the astrology to prepare? I think it's good to know when a transit is going to begin and end, so you can know when it's over going in if you're afraid. I think it's good to try to delineate if it was going to be a really good transit for you. Just try to articulate what that could be, so you're leaving space for that. So Robert Hand gives a great example in one of the articles he wrote for, I think, Star IQ, that website that was back in 2000. Who was that? Was the astrologer in Seattle, Rick Levine. So he had this website that Robert Hand was writing for a while. And I think astro.com, Robert Hand had some articles there too. But he's got this famous article. He's like, I had Mars in my midheaven. I was at an astrology conference in Britain. And he was like, I'm a little nervous. Is this going to go poorly? And he said what ended up being was they took him one day to an ancient battlefield. And I think it was like Mars in Capricorn. And it's like, so there it is. I mean, we can articulate this stuff. Every planet has positive significations of the traditional and of the modern and all of it. I mean, I think even Algol, there's some real positive there. So, there, that's enough. Now you're out of the fear because you can just focus on that. And then when it comes and it is problematic, then you at least have a processing tool. You're like, okay, there it is, and it's going to be over. But you can counter the narrative, the astrological narratives, using astrology to counter it. And it's very useful to do that, in my opinion.
Yeah, it two things. First, I just want to comment, since we've had this on the lighter note, which that was a great note. That was a very light note. I've also noticed in my life, it's the most challenging. I know this is for sort of cliche, but absolutely true. It's the most challenging transits, the ones that I really have to work hard through, that maybe don't feel good in the moment, that I just feel awesome afterwards. And that's always something to look forward to.
Yeah.
And oh, there was a question in that, but my brain just went poof.
I mean, I can just say something. I mean, yeah, Saturn return's a great example. I mean, I look at my own Saturn return, horrific at a number of levels, crazy. But yeah, I mean, I look back and I'm like, everything that a lot of what I am today came through the Saturn return. I mean, a lot of the suffering and the pain and the challenge forged me, and it's undeniable. And so that was a real pivot and turning point in my whole life with Saturn return. And it again, it was not easy, objectively not easy. I mean, I can look back but the skills I learned, the healing I did, the techniques that I was forced to embrace to get through the challenge and pain and suffering, those have all been long lasting. And a lot of them have. So it's just an example. And I love that about Saturn return: threshold of maturity, challenge, obstacle, basically life saying, nope, you got to let all that go. Here's your real, the real nature of maybe what life is, or what the true kind of darker nature at times in a certain sector of our lives. And we have to confront that and face it. It's not going to serve anyone to, and this is where sometimes people are like, oh, don't sugarcoat the astrology. And I kind of get what they're saying at one level, which is you don't want to pretend like something isn't hard as if that would make it go away. And so there's that side of it, which I think is real. And I think the other side of it is, yes, but you also don't want to pretend like it couldn't be something else, because it very well may be. And that's why waiting to see what the transit is going to show, I always tell people a lot. I'm like, okay, feel into it immediately. See what that's becoming. Mercury's about to enter Sagittarius tomorrow, or 5 days, however many days. And it will retrograde there. And it won't leave Sagittarius until January, I think, late December, maybe. I forgot the exact date it leaves. But upon its entry, we may have some revelations there, pretty clear, like what's going on with what we're going to have to be 2 months of review and figuring out and processing. I mean, so you feel into a transit. It invites you to stay open to what it wants to share. That's how I think about it. So we can't, if it's trying to tell us, like a Saturn return, there's great examples. People become huge superstars. Adam Driver, Saturn return, he becomes a global movie star. Whereas before it was like Girls and some other more minor work. And he's got Saturn in the 10th, I think, or with the midheaven in the 11th. I forgot which one. Very prominent Saturn. And the Saturn return fit exactly. He's great ranks, is what Thaddeus Fallon says. New foundations and great ranks. So we've got to keep an openness to that. So they go together. You can't foreclose one. You can't foreclose any of it. Yeah. And that means also you can't sugarcoat, if that makes sense. It's
absolutely. And I remembered my other thought, but I'm going to dig into this for a moment. Thinking about maybe using Saturn, a more difficult planet, as an example. Something I talk with, I've had this conversation multiple times with Larry Arrington, is about how the astrological chart is a map. And in it, right, we can see everything. We may not predict it, for like it contains everything, but if we don't know what that is yet. And just because it's nice to remember, because maybe someone had a really difficult Saturn return, like was really gnarly, right? There's a sense of like, that is a piece of the map that has revealed itself, but that doesn't mean like, but it's almost like then it can like, it's been completed, right? Not to say that you won't have difficult Saturn moments, but like not like if someone's, I'll just use my example. My father died at my Saturn return. It was pretty brutal. And I think during my Saturn square, I was really struggling with, oh my God, is someone going to leave my life, right? Every time Saturn makes a hard aspect, is it going to be the same thing? And realizing that there may be difficult things, but in a sense, right, each is so like it's a piece of that map we can't replicate. Do you agree with that model of thought?
Yeah, I do. And I think about it the way, this is another way to kind of say something similar. And I think it's pretty closely aligned. People say sometimes to me, like, well, why isn't this transit doing anything? And I say, what do you mean? It is. It's you're not understanding what it's doing. So let's think about your life. And that sounded harsh. I would never quite say it like that, but I would say, listen, it exists. Let me phrase this differently. The transit exists.
Mm-hmm.
The fact is, Saturn is in Pisces right now. That's not a lie. That's not fake. Now, maybe if you're using one of the many sidereal zodiacs, you would have a different opinion. But so the question, I think I've said it like this before, is astrology invites us to put our lives and the facts of our lives into its map, rather than the opposite, where we are. I'm not saying this quite like I've got it written down somewhere before, but basically, it's the invitation to adapt the life facts into the symbol set, rather than trying to restrict the life facts because of the symbol set, something like this. And so it's always the astrology. It's always happened. The astrology always exists. And if someone's having a hard time, and well, it's in my 10th, and Saturn's in my 10th right now in Pisces as a Gemini rising, I don't understand what that is. Well, then it just becomes, let's get some imagination on. Let's play with these symbols. Maybe they have a limited understanding of all that Saturn can be and do, and that's where the astrologer comes in. It's like, okay, here's like a list of 30 things that we assign to Saturn. One of these probably is here, maybe, or, start talking to them about their 10th house. Well, what happened in March 2023? Saturn came. And sometimes it's just someone hasn't had the experience, or, to know how to approach the question of what is this transit doing? Like there's a few layers to get into that, try to uncover that. So, yeah, I just think the astrology is always happening. And let me say this differently. There's one other way that I've said this before, and I like to think about it, is someone has natal Mars in Cancer in the 8th. Mm-hmm. And they're like, well, what does that mean? I like to just say, you tell me. You have the placement. Your life is the delineation. So you have the answer to what that means. Actually, I don't. I mean, I can then, as the astrologer, my job is to help tease it out and try to explore that with someone. But that's how I think about it. Honestly, it's like, okay, they're the living Mars in Cancer in the 8th, and I want to study the meaning of that from studying them. And so, anyhow, that's how I think about this. Yeah. I hope that answered it some. Yeah.
It did. Okay. The symbols aren't hollow, right? They're always going to be filled with a story. The same way you're like, what's Mars in my 8th? Well, what is Mars in your 8th? Like, what is the story? It's not just a abstract idea. Like this is your life we're talking about. We're here to unpack it.
Yes. And I would never say that in a reading, like someone new to the astrology, like, hey, it's my first reading, and I'm like, you tell me, that would be a little aggressive. But, people that can understand what's being said there, I think that would land in certain contexts, especially with astrologers, and I think most astrologers, that if you do enough readings, this kind of stuff becomes pretty clear, I think, pretty quickly. Like, you've got to explore with someone their life, or a reading is really flat. I mean, I spend a lot of time in the readings. Just someone says, this is my issue. I'm like, stop. All right. 10 minutes of me just grilling them. What is this? What is that? When is this? What is this? What is that? What about this? And just so I can even understand and begin to try to bring that into the symbol set. You know, so I like that about my work and my job, because even that alone helps people just like start answering questions. Like an example, someone is going to apply for a job. They want to get a new job, frustrated at their current job, or they're like, I'm having to get a new job. Let's say someone just says it like that. I'm like, okay, well, let's stop. Why? And then you learn pretty quickly their job isn't going to fire them. They're actually doing okay there. And so then that's different than I just was fired 2 weeks ago and have $2,000 in my bank account. That's a completely different set of facts. And so when you talk about that Mercury retrograde coming, for one person, you might say like, listen, I know it's tough. Maybe use that to just do some planning. If you're protected now with stability, you know, you might not want to blow up your life. There's a lot of grinding energy here to review stuff. And like next February, March, April, you're going to get a chance to really initiate some new stories. That would probably would be what I would tell that person. Whereas the person that's got like 2 weeks or it's the streets, then it becomes like, all right, who can you call? What resources do you have? Do you have a lease? You know, I mean, because it's not going to help me just to say, here's what the 10 things my textbook says about this. They're still in crisis after that reading, you know, and I have a chance with them to try to get into some of the nitty gritty, and then, using astrology the whole time to say, all right, contact these shelters, or, you know, contact Uncle Jim. He invited you 2 weeks ago. That feels like a good one. You know, maybe move there before the retrograde, you know, then you can start using the astrology to plan for that particular solution. But you see, if that initial phrase, I didn't know any of those things at all. And so the reading would have been just, you know, maybe not as potent.
You have to have context. That's what's so important, right? And it's funny, I've had experiences myself as an astrologer, and I know better. And I've had readings with some very intelligent astrologers that I would argue have very little social skills. Not very little. I'm being kind of mean, but truly, who've said some really horrible things to me without figuring out the context of my life, right? Like saying things like, this is going to be really difficult or bad, without knowing, right? Like my experience with mental health or where I've been, all of that. Like there's no context and realize. So I guess what I'm saying is I appreciate your approach so much, because it's not like, I mean, you gave a really big example, but it really can, even on the more sort of minor things, without getting that context, it can be harmful.
Yeah. Extremely. And like people with love, a common question you probably get a lot. They're like, okay, what about love life? Sometimes the first question I'll ask is, do you even want to be partnered? Do you even want that in your life? Because some people just assume it's just our cultural reaction. And that question alone, sometimes people are like, I've been single 20 years. I'm like, okay, what's this? Do you want to be in a partnership? And then a lot of times people will just say things like, well, I'm open to it, or maybe, I guess I'm open to it. But then when you kind of hear them talk about it, or give them an invitation, like, well, actually, no, I love my life and I live, you know, I've got freedom, and my last relationship was constraining. And then, you know, they're like, well, they have Aries and comprising the 7th. Well, okay, yeah, you've got a signature for maybe more independent energy in relationship. Even if you were to be partnered, you might want to be thinking about like freedom to act. So it's not going to become a, you know, it can embody that Aries energy that, you know, is in your chart, you know. So, or the other with that one, it'll be like, okay, you've got a stellium in your 7th house in 2 months. Are you on the apps? Or, you know, what are you doing about that? Like some people are like, all right. I mean, and I'm not mean to be hard on people, but I would want to encourage that person, like, okay, well, maybe like get a haircut, you know, maybe go to the gym a little bit, like do some things to get in the game. Like if you know, I mean, cause that would be the time, go get in the game. That's, you know, and it's not going to work if you just sit there. I mean, it may work because the life is so mysterious when you have transit. Sometimes it's just divine intervention, but it probably worked better, even if there was divine intervention, to like make yourself presentable and attractive as much as you can, so that you're prepared to engage that area of life, you know. So anyhow, I don't want to sound like I'm blaming human beings. I was talking on my Patreon recently about other Rob Hand, probably my favorite astrologer. I just love Rob Hand. I love his work because he's a bridge between the ancient, the modern, and he's very much wise. He's a very wise guy, a wise person. So I just really love his work. But he has this thing like, astrology works better if someone is self-aware and like has a spiritual life. Like that's how it's going to work. I mean, without that, it's sometimes not even worth, it's kind of hard to use it as a tool if you don't have these, some other tools going for you, or the ability to implement a tool, or, like I look back on my life when I was a crazy, drug addled in addiction. I mean, nothing works at all. Life doesn't work. So I think I did learn about Saturn return the first time. This was a different phase of my life, but I remember it was in San Francisco, and my roommate was like this guy who was big into kirtan. That scene, you've in California, but there's a whole like Buddhist scene that was up there, like Ram Dass and all of the different teachers in the Bay Area and stuff. So I was kind of around that scene briefly. And this guy was like, "It's Saturn return." And I remember that's the first time I ever heard it. And I was like, and then I remembered later when he told me that. And I think he was probably going through a Saturn return during that time. He was a little older than me. I was quite younger. But anyhow, why am I saying that? I forgot now. But I just hope. Yeah, go ahead.
No. What I loved about your example is, because I don't know, what is Saturn doing today? Saturn's being very loud, but we can figure that out in a moment. But going back to your example, I don't think you were blaming people. I think if anything, you were expressing astrology's ability to show us our individual beings, right? Like the fact that I may live in a culture that only values me if I'm in a relationship, but suddenly this astrologer, it may be the first time in my entire life someone's actually asked me, "Do you want to date anybody?" Right? Like after like 20 years of not dating someone, and then saying like, yeah, I see maybe your seventh house, a little more independent. And like, that could be the first time I actually saw myself. And that's like so beautiful. So I don't think that's blaming people at all.
Yeah, and I'm with you. No, it's I guess I'm just with you because we don't have a real client here. So the way I'm saying some of this stuff is probably not how I wouldn't be. I'd be much softer. But so I would never. I would be, when you're with someone, you really need to be careful how every word, as you mentioned earlier. I mean, even one word could stay with the client. One wrong word. And that's not to have fear as an astrologer, but it's just we have to have a heightened sense of the language we're using, because if you just say it a little bit differently, people will remember that one thing, and then that's all they took from the reading was that, oh, he told me that I'm alone because Mars was the ruler of my seventh, and then they change it. I'm always going to be alone, or something like this. And so you don't, it's very important to parse the language carefully. I just want to say, yes, I mean, that's huge in astrology, just huge. One of the great powers of it, isn't it, that it can actually describe things to us that are true, and that we understand the truth of it. Finally, like we knew it somehow, but it's the astrology that finally brought it together in a way that we could digest it or see it somehow clearly or fully. And it's just so beautiful. Just so beautiful.
Yeah. And adding to that too, right? I think it's because I see you're saying the sort of, you don't want to give someone the impression, well, now you're meant to be alone. But maybe like the larger question is, well, maybe not the larger question. The other thing that I always think bring to astrology, I have to remind people, is that everyone deserves love. Everyone who wants to be in a relationship and wants to be loved, like that is a human right. And you are, no matter what the chart says, like you are open to that. But maybe the question is, maybe you want to find love through your friends, or maybe you like have found relationships in the past that, want too much of you. So it's saying like, oh, maybe you can find love in a space that gives you some more space to breathe. Right. So it's not like negating that you're going to be alone, but it's letting people know that there's a whole world and they can find what they want. It's possible. That's why it's all possible.
Yeah, completely. And that would be I tell people this a lot too. When this comes up, I say, well, listen, it's all coming. Jupiter's in your seventh. So any Capricorn rising out there, Jupiter's about to be in your seventh house, 9 June 2025. So what I would tell them is, listen, it's a time to reveal, like, just be open. Like, what if it's not the soulmate, long-term committed partnership? The odds are it probably isn't that. Could be that. Don't dismiss that. That could easily be it too. But what if it's just learning more wisdom around that part of your life, like what you want, what you don't want, what intimacy means to you, what, maybe you'll have a few situations that come up to teach you about kind of your true belief. And I think that this is acknowledging we're deluded as humans a lot. I mean, we all are. We have some blinders up. That's just the nature of humanness. Like, we think things, we have beliefs, and then those, through our life experiences, we change our lives change, the facts of our lives, but also our perceptions change. And sometimes a transit is as much about changing our perceptions about a set of topics in our life that are found in the chart than it is about what we expect is supposed to happen with those topics. And so you'll see it a lot, like people, Jupiter in the 7th, and okay, they had this crush thing and maybe it didn't quite work out, but now they're like clearer than they've ever been when Jupiter leaves about, okay, yeah, I know, I that's not kind of what I'm looking for anymore. Or, no, now I know I want to be single, or whatever it is. Like, so yes, I mean, I completely agree with you around, we have to be careful, safe, thorough, exploring different possible meanings, and always with the question of what's serving this person before me. How is this useful to them? How am I inspiring them? How am I, helping them heal? How am I, we're kind of healers, I think. I like that idea of astrologer as healer, and so yeah, thanks for mentioning that about that Aries example, because those are exactly the kind of things I would want to say. Of like, okay, maybe, you're just looking for independence, and the next relationship here when Jupiter's there is gonna, or I guess Saturn will be there in 2025 next summer. So maybe that's what you would tell someone, like, hey, it's time to maybe put that into practice. Saturn is going to be there, and you and your partner, you've got this partner you've been dating a little bit, next summer, just look for how you might have to create some containers or around space so that you can thrive, and
Yeah. I will say, when Saturn went through my 7th, like, you spoke about, suddenly we don't even know what we want. And that entire transit did me over one of those ways where I left going, oh my God, I have completely different views around relationships than I had before, right? Even as an astrologer, you're expecting the obvious: breakup, marriage, this sort of big, heavy Saturn things, but it was completely different. It just helped me realize what my containers are. And also, personally, the fact that I really value friendship, right? Not that I don't date, but it it changed my worldview. And that's like the beauty of some of these things, that they can, if we're asking the right questions.
oh yeah, are some of those epiphanies still with you? I mean, it's still kind of central to how you think about relationship.
Oh, yeah. And I go back in that period of time and I go, oh, that's like really when I made the commitment to be a better friend, right? And this is just like my personal philosophy. I don't know how people can be in intimate one-on-one relationships if they're not, don't know how to be friends with people. That's like a whole topic. But yeah, I go back to that period of life and be like, oh, that's like when I made this commitment to my friends, and it's something that I'm still a huge part of me.
Yeah, wonderful. And that's Saturn. My favorite way to talk about it is new foundation, a new foundation or new foundations, and that's textual. It's just such an opportunity to have a new foundation. Now, implied in that can be, tearing away the structure to kind of re-pour the concrete or something. So it can be extreme at times, but just the idea that we're going to get a new foundation in an area of life, and it may take some time to lay, but 2.5 years, depending on, it's exciting and it's great. And so, yeah, I think that's a cool chart example. And all of us, what's the new foundation in our Pisces sector? We're right in the middle of it right now. What's happening, and next year's big for Pisces, particularly March and April. Venus and Mercury station direct in Pisces, with Saturn, with the north node of the moon. So, we're all in that right now. And I think, anyhow, it's exciting. I get excited about that for people. I'm like, cool, man, because you got like 12 more months or 15 more months. And that eclipse that just happened was a shift of that energy. So September actually became quite important for that Saturn and Pisces foundational work. And I've seen a lot of cool examples. Like, it's like September came and it's so literal. It changed the Saturn work. And now so there's some openings for people. But
yeah. Oh, okay, I know we're coming at time, but can I end with a question we have? I guess non sequitur here, kind of. I have one last question. That's my very long way of saying I have one last question. It's more of a discussion topic for you.
Yep.
So when we started, right, you came off and came on and we're talking about, right, 7 traditional planets and like maybe a more, historical base of working. But last night, not even thinking I was getting ready for this interview, I did other things to get ready, by the way. I picked up this issue of the Cali Review just because it was in my house and I was looking at it, right? And you're in it. You're like the first person. And I read your piece. And if I say mispronounce something, stop me. So when random rules, the power of textual sortilege to enhance astrological signification. That's a long title. But if I'm what I'm getting from this, maybe I missed the mark completely, which was so beautiful. It was essentially, right, like every time we engage in an astrological text, whether it be a meme, ancient source, modern cookbook, in a sense, we are actively engaging and in the language of astrology and keeping it alive and sort of writing it as we go. Did I get the gist of this article?
I think so. Yeah, that's a great expression of its gist. Absolutely. We're writing it as we go. And we have, as astrologers, that is, it's not a dead practice, I guess is what I would say. It's like a language. You have living languages or dead languages just in the linguistic field. And the definition of a dead language is it's not being used or spoken. Some of these get revived a little bit, like people speak Latin for fun, but it's basically a dead language. And I think when you think about a living language, what does that mean? Well, words are being invented all times. Phrases are being invented, idioms, new metaphor. It's poetry, right? The idea you make it new as your pound. You make it's living. And so you can combine, it's linguistic. Meaning is linguistic. The production of meaning is linguistic. Now, there is epiphany just in silence, but we would never know about it unless someone came out and tried to articulate, So all the meditation masters, they've got the books, right? And they're putting words for these concepts, but so I believe that the human being is a language-based being and that's how we create meaning. And so set aside like that conversation, because maybe there is these deeper like epiphanies that are non-linguistic. Certainly there's non-linguistic parts of that. But in astrology, it's symbolic. It's a 2D map. I mean, astrology isn't we go outside and look at the sky. A lot of astrologers like to say that's how they kind of begin the divine astrology. And I push back against that because it's actually measurement systems. We're measuring the sky, but even the observation isn't astrology. It becomes astrology when we bring it into meaning-making systems, which are linguistic. You have glyphs. It's written on a 2-dimensional piece of paper, like a book. And it's all abstractions anyway. The sky is something else. We abstract it onto this other map. And then, so we're in language now. That's why Mercury signifies astrology, in my view, and signifies language and writing, because it's the same thing. You're through symbols and abstraction, creating meaning. And so when you have the living language, just to go back to that, we have an opportunity as astrologers, new expressions for planets. And we've got great colleagues. I know, and I know a lot of the same people, amazing astrologers out there of all ages doing exceptional work to even talk about something like Saturn. I mean, that's never ending, will never go away. As long as there's language, you'll have new ways to describe and express and access that symbolism. And so, I like what you said there. What was it that we can engage it basically as astrologers? We're tasked with keeping it alive, but making it new, renewing it. It's got to be renewed. And we're the people that are alive now. We're ensouled in these bodies, right now in this, material matrix or whatever. The other guys have passed on. Maybe they're reincarnated. Maybe, who do you think, I don't know, Rob Hand is a reincarnated, I don't know, Alan Leo, I don't know. But I mean, maybe there's something like that. But basically, we've got to engage it to keep it alive. And there's not many rules about what that means even. Like there are no rules. That's what it means to be art. That's why it's an art. You know, the best art are people that are just kind of doing their own thing. They're just inspired, and now they've studied and they know certain techniques and things. But, you know, what's an example? Like, I'm trying to think of some good examples. I mean, like painting, I guess you can come up with many examples, but like Basquiat, he just has these books that he opened. No one told him that. He got this book of symbols from the library, and he would just like always have the TV on.
Yeah.
And he was just these huge canvases, and like something on TV, he just paints it in, looks at a symbol in the book. So that was all fresh and new. I guarantee you, no one said, go do this. I mean, he just was totally inspired to create, but the canvas was made, you know? And so it's the same with astrology. Like the astrology will get made, whether it's a book or a video or a podcast or like a reading, but how you make it. I mean, I just encourage people, and that was why I wrote that article too, is like, just break free. Like I don't want to get, I was fatigued around some of the traditionalism in the community, even though I studied that and I'm grounded in that for a lot of how I choose to practice. But I just think it can quickly become restrictive and deadening, and we need to keep it fresh and new and alive. And that's why, coming back to this idea that the new planets, like there's new aspects. There are harmonic aspects. There are all kinds of new systems. And when I was formally debating people on this, sometimes on X Twitter, which I'm not on anymore, thank God. But you know, my retort to them is like, listen, you want to make a new system with outer planets? Great, let's walk through it. How would we do that? Well, maybe you would have you could have elegant systems, like the Thema Mundi gives us rulership cleanly. There's a clear reason in terms of the systematic outlay of what rules what sign based on the speed of the planets. And so let's make one up. You want to add in all of these other planets? How are you going to fit Ceres or Pluto or Haumea or Makemake? And I mean, would you have then rulers of all of the signs? Like each sign has multiple rulers, 3 or 4 or 5. Like everything's in play, and that would be really exciting. But I was trying to encourage people, like, go farther. Like everything's in play. You want to make a new system? Let's go. Let's create. And I was like wanting to help with that. But so anyhow, I hope that makes sense what I'm trying to say there. That I do encourage complete creativity, and even our friends that want to say Pluto rules Scorpio, and that's fine, or you know, that want to use a different house system. Like I'm not even against those people ultimately. I support them completely. It's just I don't want to quiet anybody. Sometimes you see people like try to subdue other types of practice, and anyhow, we're going off on a lot there, but just know I think it's about creative astrology and keeping it alive. Thanks for asking about that.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm glad I got to write that article, and I'm glad they asked me to do that. And I love Callie. I love Jen's art. So I felt really honored.
It's great. And what it reminded me of, and maybe you'll resonate with this, you mentioned Manly P. Hall before. And Manly P. Hall, who I don't admittedly know that much about, I just spent a lot of time at PRS, which is now an arts and culture nonprofit. Great place, whole other story. But he wrote extensively on astrology, and I was reading his philosophy of astrology, and it was, you know, I think when I was earlier in my studies, more, you know, maybe traditionally inspired, I might have been like annoyed seeing some of the holes. Like, you know, is that even true? I don't know if that's historically accurate, right? But going back, I was like, you know, it doesn't matter. He was able, I mean, it's good to maybe understand where we've grown and, you know, some of the holes are, but he was using astrology in his own way to like get his message across. And this symbolism of astrology, like he made it work for him in this way that's really inspiring. And like this message of how we can understand ourselves and be better humans and, you know, community members, etc., like fulfill our, you know, highest selves. It's such important work. And the fact that, like, yeah, he's using astrology to his ends, and it's really beautiful and something I can appreciate. And it totally made me think of, yes, this is something living, and we can use it in these myriad of ways without having to go back and pretend that Thema Mundi doesn't exist.
Yep. Straight up. And it's like it's a incitement for creative work. That's what I want to encourage with everybody. Like, go do your thing. Like, go write your book about Ceres. I want to see that research. Like, there's rich symbolism there. that's waiting to be explored. And someone could just run with that and have a whole, I mean, I bet there's great techniques that we don't even, that would help readers and that could be help clients, like to do some really deep work and pick, there's a new one. What was it that just came out? They named it after like a Mongolian, let me see here, dwarf planet. I think it was the Chinese name. I think it was Chinese or Mongolian. What was it called? Gong Gong. Yeah, Gong Gong. And I mean, I haven't heard anything about it. Chinese water god. But I mean, that's just, the point is that it's infinite. I mean, you could, like Pallas, our friend Pallas Augustine. Do you know Pallas? Their book on the IC, that was just waiting, and they did all that deep research. And I haven't seen the book, but I mean, that's just an example of the creativity that is available right now for whatever you're inspired by. And that's what I tell people: what inspires you? I mean, go with it, follow that, and you'll be surprised, like what you have to give. So
it reminds me, we sometimes forget astrology is here to help us, right? Even if we're going back like thousands of years, astrology was there to help us understand when the certain area would flood or when the king needed to hide. And as our societies and lives have evolved, astrology can also be here to help us solve our problems. And that's okay. It's not a dead, as you said, calcified thing where it shouldn't be.
Yeah. It's a golden age. We're living in that astrological golden age. I think it's partly, I mean, there's a lot of human golden age happening right now, just with the way we can communicate. And I think we're going to increasingly, I'm not into as much of like the new age but I mean, I think there is a lot of exciting stuff coming for humanity. And I think astrology, that will apply to astrology too. And we're seeing it now, the fruits of it now, even that I'm talking to you across the world. And,
I love this, and I agree with you. I'm a little over. There's certain, it's going to sound so obvious, but there's certain sects of the astrological and magic community that are just like, hiding away in their bunkers off grid, sort of cheerleading the demise of the world. And I tend to believe that that's maybe not so healthy, and that as a human, I like cities, I like people. I like to believe that there are opportunities within this technology. So thank you. I feel like I got like a sort of nice breeze coming my way from you.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. I'm with you on that. I'm not going to why would I be in the bunker? I mean, it just sounds so boring. I think I would want to go to the city pretty quickly, head back to the city. So
same. With that, I know you're about to go, maybe not into a bunker, but maybe your study bunker of the mind. Is there anything you're working on? It's like you can sort of allude to?
Sure. I have this paper I've been writing. I released a video on it already, so it's not like the work isn't out there, and I explained it all in that video, but it's about some art that I'm making with the planetary color signification. So it's just some of the work that I'm doing. It's a long thing. People can find the video if you just go to YouTube, type in SJ Anderson 144, type in, I think, colors, planetary color spheres. I think you might want to, or squares, planetary color squares. The video should come right up. But that was important for me because I see the charts in color a lot of the times. I like to think about, or just energies of, like, you can look at a chart, even let's pull up the chart of the moment. So this won't take too long, but just to share this and kind of give an introduction to people. And I look at the chart through rulership. We can determine where, what is something called a final dispositor, or there sometimes can be multiple final dispositors, or planets that are sharing a dispositorship through reception, through co-rulership. And so when you pull up the chart now, you've got nothing. Everything is, nothing stands out as a primary ruler of anything. And so this would be an interesting chart because you have a lot of planets assigned responsibility over the transiting sky. So it would be a lot of mixed colors in terms of the color of the moment. Whereas if you go to something like, and so you could view the chart that way. You could actually put this chart of the moment and just see colors, and you can know, like, there's some kind of energetic expression there. And this is based on formulas. It's something I call whole sign rulership index. You can get that on my website. It's just right there. It's a formula of what planet is ruling this. I use all forms of whole sign rulership for that. But anyhow, I'm getting too technical now, but just to know, it's a color representation of the planetary energetic. And just to finalize that, you go to February 2021, there was a new moon in Aquarius with all planets there except Mars and Taurus. And that color square was black and blue, Mercury and Saturn. And it was largely black because of how predominant Mercury was ruling all of the planets. And that's in that video, I give that as an example because that was the height of COVID. And to come back to the COVID topic, but the lockdown period, it was really a dark time, and people that were lives were lost and all of that. But it was shown with this color map. And so I feel like color, they write about it, the ancient astrologers, they assign planets colors, and those colors actually match the meaning of the planets a lot of time. So you can and then there's color theorists. So in that paper, I go through a lot of color theorists from the 20th century, and you just try to get like more into like the color and the planets and the vibes of those things. So that's one I want to get that done, and we'll see what that eventually becomes. But I'm mainly just trying to take a break. It's just a lot, I need to just kind of stop. I do a lot of collab. I always say yes to almost everything. And I just can't, I'm going to have to, my Mars retrograde part of it is figuring out what I might be, what's in like my priorities, and kind of just getting some energy back. And I think I might do 2025 if I can just take a year off from that. But I don't know what your practice is like with social media and clients, and that fills up a life pretty quickly. And
I'm a maniac. I share some of my chart. I have moon in Gemini in the 11th with Rahu, pretty close. And like, I just feed off other humans. So like, I have to wake up early and create little times for myself to study. Cause like, once I'm awake, I'm just like in communication with the whole world at all times. Or else I get really depressed. That's what I've noticed. I've tried to be like, oh, I'm just going to be like living against your chart. Like I like get sad if I don't have something to look forward to in the day. So anyway, I am a very social creature, but I'm also obsessed with your art project. I'm like, oh, I don't know if it's an actual. So I was like, this is like, I'm thinking, I don't know enough about art history to speak eloquently to this, but I'm thinking about like color field painting. And I was thinking about like the work of like Ellsworth Kelly, who I know used mostly primary colors, but now I like want to look at his chart and see like if his chart colors spoke to his painting practice. So I'm just really stoked for this.
You can go to my website. It's already there. I mean, when I released that video, I coded into my site. So anytime it loads, the art gets generated for the moment of the loading. So the art project is kind of live, one level of it, which is the real-time generation of the pieces. So if you just go there, I mean, you can see it, sjanderson144.com. And I just pulled it up now just to come back to it. Mars is the primary ruler right now of the sky, which might sound strange because it's weak in Cancer, but Mars rules both the Sun and Mercury in Scorpio by domicile, and over Scorpio, because it's a fixed sign, there's Venus that can come in, but mainly that's a Mars sign. And then because there's a lot of water energy, you get some rulership of Mars through that as well by something called triplicity. But you can just see it there. But yeah, just as an example, I won't say much, but check it out, and you'll kind of see what
I'm looking at it now. I didn't, because I knew that I was like, oh, his website always like tells the I didn't know what that was. Like I've been here before, and I was like, oh, you have the card. Anyways, I'm not gonna like do a really bad job describing it to people, but I thought it was something like some weather pattern I didn't understand. And that's now that I understand what's happening. That's brilliant.
And the paper, when it comes out, and in the video, I break it down with the formula. But basically, this is just my formula. You can tweak the formulas. This is the way I've tweaked it. But you can see there, that first one, it's listed in Chaldean order of the colors. Yeah. So Saturn is always at the top. That's black. Jupiter is gray. Mars is red. Sun is yellow. Venus, Mercury is blue, and the moon is green. So that's something that it's just interesting. Like it's derived from a fundamental piece that goes back to the beginnings of horoscopic astrology, and it's an example. And when I made that video at the end, I was like, listen, get creative, everybody. Like, this is the time, Pluto and Aquarius, innovation. There's a lot you can do to embrace technology. And excuse me, one of the ways I did all this from coding with ChatGPT. I didn't know how to do any of this, but as soon as those tools came out, I taught me how to code, and I knew it was in my mind, but I had no ability to make it. And then using AI, I made it. So it's just an example of like what kind of stuff's available to astrologers in particular. All kinds of new softwares, new tools, new ways of representing the sky. So I think we need to get excited just to come back to that. We're living in a kind of golden age.
Yeah. And you, just to be clear, you have a math background, right?
Yes.
You study. So just like, so you are taking the way your brain works and making the putting the astrology through the funnel of your brain, which is fantastic. This is my brain would break having to do code, but I love that you've given us this gift. Where on your website, I noticed there's tarot cards.
Yeah.
Is that a specific deck, or is that something you made as well?
So I use 3
Images.
decks there,
Okay.
and the 3 decks, so each time it loads, so for each planet and sign combination,
Yeah.
the code will randomly select one of 3 decks. So that's why you can see there's, I think what you're looking at is different than what I'm looking at, because
I see that there's the the Marseille I'm seeing, right? Is it the Marseille? And then there's these other ones that's like,
so the Tarot of Marseille, that is something called Gene Dodal. He's one of the famous decks.
okay.
And I just found these online. It's public domain. This one isn't as aesthetically pleasing because the different decks are different photographs, different lighting, different probably even decks. So it's kind of just my best way to find versions. There is the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot, the most famous tarot in the world. These are Pamela Coleman Smith's public domain images. They're called the Pamela Coleman Smith A images. I think they came into the public domain a few years ago. Okay. So I use those, and then that's actually my deck. Yeah, I made that deck in 2015. And,
the photography deck. So it's
yes.
the 2 basics, and then yours. That's wonderful. This is the question I should ask at the beginning, because I looked at your website and I was like, oh, he's just sharing information with us, and now I'm like, oh, it's so much richer than that.
And admittedly, there's a lot more work to do on the site. These are the kind of things I'm going to work on. I have to get back to is getting a lot of this work, just continuing to work on these things like this. But yeah, this was my photography deck, and it was a big part of my life when I made that. And actually, when I finished that deck, within like few months, I met Jen's art, and then I became an astrologer. So it was kind of like that was my final thesis or project with my tarot work. And you can see here with the cards, you have the zodiacal insignias, the zodiacal glyphs. So I was already working with astrology, and I had no idea when I was making this deck. I honestly had no idea exactly what astrology was in a certain sense. I had no idea that an astrologer lectures. When I met Jen, and I know we'll wind down here in a second, but we were at a group of friends that we had mutual friends. We met at a music festival in Boise, Idaho called Tree Fort. And they rented this huge house, 20 people, 10 rooms. Jen was a person I think was seeing at that time, came with him. So it wasn't even an astrology thing, but these were esoteric community and just different, it was under a larger umbrella of people interested in astrology adjacent topics. And so when Jen was there and I met her, she was like, excuse me, I have to go give a lecture for, I don't remember what org, on some, tertiary progressions, or I forgot what she said. But through those very limited conversations with her, I learned actually that astrology has an academic side. It's deeply historical. It's textual. She's an impressive intellect. a PhD. I think at that time she was still a PhD candidate, or she was just finishing from, I believe, Berkeley in German language. So, you meet someone like that, and she's like, yeah, I'm an astrologer. I'm about to go, and it instantly, it opened up for me a pathway of the richness of what all that astrology is. And so immediately I started, I just went and checked out every book I could in my home in Austin, where I was living at the time. And I became an astrologer literally that weekend, just from talking to her. And it was amazing. I can't even believe. And I'll just share that was a crazy weekend. I didn't even tell her. She doesn't know this, but it was my birthday. So I was a solar return chart that weekend. And that solar return chart had Mercury, Cazimi with a new moon. And so it was like the Mercury Cazimi, and there was something about that Mercury being so auspicious in that solar return. It was like, I look back and I'm like, dang, yeah, it makes total sense. It was like the one Mercury Cazimi solar return. I don't know how often those happen, but I think that might not happen again.
It seems pretty rare. Yeah. Oh, that's wild. The Mercury Cazimi was your I'm in astrology now chart. And then it kicked off with such a bang.
Yeah, and it hasn't stopped. That's the crazy thing. It was really like, I mean, it literally is before and after. It changed. My whole life changed. Like, that's something I really take with me when I talk to people. Like, life can change like that. And I had no idea when I went there. I had no idea that my life was going to change forever, and that it would be me becoming an astrologer. I had no concept of that at all. And so it's just shocking, actually, looking back at, like, literally the whole life can change completely out unexpectedly, one day to the next.
There are no parents, no other adults, no one to interfere with the fun.